Okay, welcome everybody. This is another part of our series in CPD in 43, where we've got a presentation from Luke Loveridge, the co-founder of HomeLINK, really exciting business, which is looking at a key piece of technology in the Internet of Things, combining machine learning and enabling healthier homes. I won't go into too much detail because obviously he will be going into a lot of detail in regard to this. Really exciting to see how technology is being used to analyze and enhance stocks of dwellings and buildings throughout the country. Just before he starts off, I just wanted to highlight a couple of events that we've got coming up. We've got one on Wednesday, 30th of June, which is from Extratherm, which is about designing zero carbon regulations and future home standards, etc. And then we've got another one on Wednesday, 7th of July, which is from New Lock, and that's in regard to slate roofing, ceramic tiles, and solar insert. So please do go to the Eventbrite page and sign up for these events. But without further ado, I will stop sharing at my end and pass it over to Luke. I will mute myself, but please do, if you have any questions or queries, please do post them in the chat box, and we will take a Q&A session towards the end of the event.
Brilliant. Shall I go, Usman?
Yes, please. Hand it straight over to you, Luke.
Cool. Brilliant. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the day. Lovely and sunny. As Usman said, I'm the CEO and co-founder of HomeLINK, essentially a smart home platform for large landlords. I'll just share my screen. One sec. Hopefully everyone can see that and the transitions.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so smart healthy homes. Just a bit of background on HomeLINK. So we, as I said, we're a smart home platform for landlords, but one of our big sort of USPs is our insights, which are based on machine learning. We've got sort of world-renowned machine learning experts who have worked on these. But recently, so about a year ago, we were actually acquired by ACO, and they're the market leader in fire and carbon monoxide detection in the UK. So their main sector is social housing. So they've got a presence in 95% of social housing, but they've also got, they're branched out into other sectors as well. So they're quite a big player. They've got, they're part of a group which turns over sort of $250 million a year. They've got quality products, and they've got their own manufacturing site in Ireland. So combined, there's a lot of complementary skills there. We've got sort of huge amount of expertise in software and, as I said, machine learning, and ACO with that manufacturing, the sales channels, and that reputation. And yeah, so we're a startup. We've been trading for about 3.5 years now, and ACO very well established, and great reputation in the sector, 30 years track record, growing every year quite significantly. So really, I want to start on the challenges of large landlords. So a big one at the moment is the Homes Act, so also known as Fitness for Human Habitation Act. And there are also similar requirements in the rest of the UK. So there's a tolerable standard in Scotland, and in Northern Ireland there's the housing order. It does apply to private and social properties, and if there are failures to meet those obligations, tenants have the right to take them to court and get compensation and remedial works. And it does cover a number of areas such as fire safety, carbon monoxide, damp, ventilation, and excess heat and cold. What we're finding at the moment is a bit of a starting to get a bit of a PPI culture. So there's a lot of solicitors that are going to tenants and sort of promoting, essentially taking their landlords to court. So they're facing significant costs. One landlord we work with on legal fees alone it's a very large landlord, but they were spending 4 million on legal fees just defending these, let alone the cost to make right or compensation. So this is very high up on the agenda at the moment. We did an analysis of historic repairs of around 200,000 properties, and from that extrapolated out the cost of condensation, damp and mould to social landlords. in the UK. So at the moment, that's for reactive repairs. That's around 100 million a year, so quite significant. But harder to estimate was sort of below the water level iceberg. So that could include related to planned works, customer contacts, complaints, and as I said, legal action. And again, just for social housing, we're estimating around 500 million a year. And I think that's on the sort of conservative side there. So just for condensation, damp and mould, for repairs, you look at it 600 million a year just for social housing, which is around 4 or 5 million homes. And we've got environmental sensors which have actually helped to decrease the risk of that mould in pilots and other projects, particularly through better identification of what it is. Is it structural? Is it behavioural? And also engaging those tenants to change their behaviour and make that sustained. Another big driver at the moment is health and well-being. So we've got quite a large project in Leeds going on at the moment, which was around, they were interested in the housing maintenance aspect, but a big part of it was actually to increase the health outcomes from those homes using technology. And in I think it's England and Wales, poor quality housings, and they took account of about 29 different conditions, the BRE. They estimate it cost the NHS around 1.4 billion a year, but of that, around 4 of those key conditions, so excess cold, excess heat, dampness, and poor indoor air quality, was accounted for the majority of that, around £1 billion per year. And again, we've got environmental sensors and insights that have detected fuel poor homes, so again, better identification, homes with excess heat and cold, and also reduced indoor air pollutants by nearly 20% through behaviour change. So we've got some really good results so far. Another big challenge, carbon emissions, so energy efficiency, really high on the agenda at the moment, and housing makes up 22% of all carbon emissions in the UK. There's obviously varying degrees. It's a big number, basically, and you might be aware of a number of sort of things lately around promoting retrofits in social housing and more generally. And there's obviously COP26, so the climate change conference in Glasgow this year, which so there's a huge spotlight on the UK to be leading on energy efficiency and carbon emissions reduction. And from our point of view, what we're trying to address is how we can best prioritise homes for retrofit in these social landlords. How can actually ensure that they stay efficient. So you get an EPC, but it doesn't necessarily stay at a C or a B or an A. It will degrade over time. Windows might be blown, draft proofing coming away, etc. Insulation starting to decay, etc. And also, how can we best identify fuel poverty? So this is, again, very much a complex challenge because it is intertwined with those other key challenges as well, such as fuel poverty. So just in terms, what are we doing with our own little part, really? We've got just an overview of the system. We've got connected fire alarms and new environmental sensors, which are coming out this August. And actually, I think there's about 1 million compatible alarms on ceilings in social landlords already. So there's a lot of devices which can be made connected. There's a gateway that connects those it's a historic RF, so radio frequency mesh network of those alarms with those new environmental sensors, and then it transmits that to the cloud into a dashboard for the landlord. So sort of just key elements of that gateway, because that's sort of like the sort of quite a critical piece. It does link all the alarms and sensors in the property. It is cloud-based, it's mains powered, so it's a fixed installation. So actually what we're seeing is a lot of demand from new build, because it's easier just to put it in at new build, or sort of existing programs of work, so voids or kitchen replacements, etc. Whenever you're going into the landlord's going into the property. It is cellular, so we have experimented with other different forms of connectivity, such as, you might not have heard of it, but LoRaWAN, so sort of low-powered radios. So, but at the moment, that cellular coverage is, national, and that's what we need to base a scale solution on. As I mentioned, it's got a desktop dashboard, and it's also set up using a smartphone. Unfortunately, we did launch the connected fire alarm solution, I think, a month before COVID hit. So that did take a hit. But even with COVID, we've got 8,000 systems installed, over 50,000 connected devices, and over 380 accounts. And as you can see, it's national. And this is really starting to ramp up as well, particularly seeing a lot more interest in the environmental sensors as well. And that is one part of an expanding ecosystem for AECO and HomeLINK. Just to, in terms of what events you can get reported from the fire alarm, so obviously activations, fire, CO, etc., whether the actual fire alarm head's been removed from the base, button tests, those sorts of things, end of life. And again, this is really interesting for the landlord in terms of replacement, knowing what's in their stock. We've worked with some landlords where some contractors have put in the wrong specification. They don't necessarily know exactly what's in their stock or when it's being replaced. I've been in homes where we've discovered like a CO alarm, which is like a year out of date. And, it's just the risk around some of these is quite high. And just the oversight and visibility of what you've got in your stock is sort of starting to come to the fore. And then environmental sensors. So again, it addresses several challenges: the damp, fuel poverty compliance, CO2, and particularly health and well-being. There is a big strategic direction around the Homes Act. There's also the ESH standard, so energy efficiency standard for social housing, COP26, and PAS 2035. PAS 2035 is interesting because it obviously ties the energy efficiency retrofitting to ventilation in the home as well. So in Scotland, they actually mandated in new builds CO2 monitors because people are starting to seal up these homes, make them very energy efficient, but then that's causing issues around damp and poor indoor air quality. Very easy to install. Just on a recent one in Leeds, it's taken 10 minutes basically to install these, and quite a high return on investment. I'm not sure how interested you'll be in terms of placement, but we recommend at least 3. So one in the bathroom, again, through sort of historic analysis, about 20% of damp issues are in the bathroom. Kitchen's another sort of high risk area, particularly risk for excess heat and humidity. And again, another source of condensation, damp and mould. And also the living room. So, well, we say the living room, but basically a room which is sort of most lived in. This is really to get key data around air quality, damp and mould, and excess heat and cold. We have seen a lot of interest in terms of bedroom as well. So people spend a lot of times in their bedroom, particularly around allergen detection, etc., which we've got. What we do leave that to the landlord to decide. What we find is when tenants are aware of benefits, they're really accepting of it. But obviously there is more sort of potentially privacy issues or big brothery type issues there. So we leave that sort of to the landlord and to sort of engage tenants on. So we've got some flexibility as well. So the CO2 sensors usually quite an expensive component. So we've split down into what we call the EI 1020. So that's just temperature, humidity, and then the CO2 variant of that, the 1025. 10-year lithium battery, and as I said before, links with the gateway, which links up to also the fire alarms, and it's also tamper proof, so it's got that mounting locking plate, so it's not easy to sort of chisel off. And all of this generates actionable insights. This is sort of the key bit of HomeLINK, really. So as landlords start to get millions of data points basically from all just environmental sensors and fire alarms, but even in our development projects where we've looked at water leak detectors, integrated water leak detectors, door sensors, boilers, and electricity monitors, that sort of thing, you're starting to get a huge amount of data, and that's usually not, great to sort of go directly into a property management system. It's not really set up for that, so you need this sort of independent IoT platform. But all of that essentially by using machine learning, so a subset of artificial intelligence, you can then constantly interpret that data and spot things that the human eye really can't spot and certain trends. And that then provides clear actionable insights which are presented to the user. I think the key point here is this isn't a computer says yes or no. It's around a decision-making aid. it gives you, it sort of helps tell the story of that property, and really gets to sort of the nut of the issues, so that you can have those conversations with the tenant, or actually empower the tenant to help themselves. Again, just sort of fresh in my mind, on the Leeds deployment that we've just been doing. There are many sort of high risk homes, and actually they've got multiple insights which have been triggered. So it could be, it might be a cold home, and also a fuel poverty insight triggered, but also that might have a sort of an allergy and poor indoor air quality as well. And it sort of starts to paint that story, whether it's to have that conversation with that tenant. So just in terms of what insights are associated with each device. So in terms of the fire and CO alarms, there's maintenance, compliance, alarm activations, and asset management events. The temperature humidity, so EI 1020, very much used for condensation, damp and mold, energy efficiency, essentially the fuel poverty or excess heat insights, and again, asset management. And then the 1025 is for more air quality, void risk, which is actually quite common, allergy risk, ventilation, and also again asset management. Just in terms of the platform, for the landlord, we've got a specific portal. This is a progressive web app, so this is accessible to anyone who's got the internet. So it's not, you don't have to download an app, and it is dynamic, so you can have that on the phone. It is split down into different areas, which I'll come on to in a bit. We've also got an installer app and a resident app. So just in terms of the portal, it's very much designed for social landlords. That was our background. I spent about 10 years in local government. It's got some key KPIs on there. It does split down into a portfolio view, which might be like sort of head of assets or sort of team managers using. You've got certain reports, which is just on the screen now. But then you've also got a property view as well, and a number of sort of pages for that, whether it's maintenance, energy, well-being, etc., or just a one view of which is what is on now. And that might be for a contact center agent. It might be for an operative, a tradesperson going to the property, might just want to check up. Are the alarms out of date, or are there any other issues I need to look at, for example? So it is designed for multiple users, and it does have, you've got experience integrating to other IT systems like property management systems. I won't say too much on the installer app. Does what it says on the tin, really. Just the key thing is that, this is out there, 50,000 devices already, and these new environmental sensors sort of hook into this. And the resident app, this is actually an old version. We do iterate quite often, but that provides those features and notifications to the resident, a bit more of a simplified version. But it does improve that resident engagement. We've been getting great engagement from residents on this, actually. And it really does enhance the business case, because I think something like 80 or 90% of, for example, condensation, damp and mold issues are just the tenant's lifestyle. So it might be that dry and close on radiators, not opening windows, etc. So again, they get notifications through and recommendations on that. And again, it sort of helps to improve the resident health and well-being, because they're much more aware of, say, for example, allergen risks, indoor air quality, those sorts of things. And just a quick one on sort of overview of what results we've got, really. So just on fire and CO, one gateway was retrofitted to an existing installation, so the alarms were already in situ. A CO alarm installed in the kitchen, sort of close to the boiler and the cooker. A high CO level was detected, leading to an activation being sent. Also, at the same time, the head, so the actual alarm itself, was removed from the base. So what actually happened here was the tenant didn't know what was going on. They just thought the alarm was maybe out of battery, or just couldn't detect anything that was wrong, because CO is so sort of insidious. You can't smell it. You can't. And what they did is they actually called the tenant. They attended the site, and they actually discovered a high risk appliance. I think in this case it was the cooker. Tends to be sort of a likely usual culprit, but also identified a high risk tenant, and potentially saved a life. One really good example of this is Barnet Homes. So I think they've deployed about 1,000 gateways to date, and within a year they had about 4 or 5 high CO alerts, which they've attended, and so that's like 4 or 5 people or even families which they potentially saved there from CO poisoning. So really great story there. And then just in terms of the environmental sensors, a good one is Wolverhampton Homes. So on the project there, we did improve ventilation by about 20%, particularly through that behaviour change, and also leading to a reduction in damp and mould risk across the board of all the properties. We did highlight an long-term unexpected voided property, identify homes with like poorer thermal efficiency ratings for potential investment, and actually some of these homes were of vulnerable people, so they did get reprioritised on the sort of capital programme. I think in this case it was some of the windows were a bit drafty, and also the draft proofing had come away, and I think on a couple of them fuel poverty was also triggered as well, and that was confirmed. So again, just painting that story. It's not just about is someone in fuel poverty or not. Oops, sorry, did that just close?
It's fine, Luke.
Is it still there?
Yeah, still there.
Sorry. One sec.
Can you scroll pages?
Is that better?
It hasn't changed for us, but I don't know whether you're able to scroll the pages now.
I'm on the case study environmental sensors.
Yep. Do you want to maybe move forward one just in case?
Can you see that?
Okay, yeah, fine. I can see it's gone back to your PowerPoint file rather than the presentation.
Okay. Is it full screen now?
Yeah, full screen back to the front page.
Right, okay, brilliant. I don't know what happened there, sorry. From current slide.
Great, that's it all back. Yeah, all
brilliant.
Back, fine.
That was very strange, sorry. So thermal efficiency rating, and yeah, we actually identified the causes of some of these mold issues as well, whether it's lifestyle or structural. I think one tenant was actually reporting pictured a huge amount of mold coming through in their property, but the actual environmental conditions were sort of optimal, so the actual lifestyle there shouldn't be any mold there basically. And when they investigated, they managed to go directly to the cause, which was an overflowing gutter basically, and an ingress of water into that property. So again, just helps to sort of get to the cause of some of these issues quicker. And that's it. So I realised I had 30 minutes. I'm not sure how long, about 20 minutes there. I thought it'd be best to sort of have more conversation really. There's a lot of stuff that we've done. We've managed to do pilots and projects across the country: Scotland, North East, London, South West and Midlands. And now with ACO, we're launching across the UK, basically.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that, Luke. That was absolutely great. Hopefully everyone can see sort of the benefits of a very apologies if I don't mean it in a negative way, but a very small segment of the IoT area, and how beneficial it could be for housing stock. So it's really exciting to see that. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, so I'll go straight to them, and hopefully we've got some more questions also following. So I presume this is quite an easy answer, but is the data that you're collecting for all the projects that you're working on, is that an open source or is it closed data for the various owners, etc.?
That's a good question, actually. So because some of them are actually R&D projects funded by, for example, the GovTech project. So it could potentially, maybe not the raw data, but the results, I think, could potentially be open source. But in terms of data itself, that's owned by the landlords. So, and they are subject to FOIs, I suppose. So you could potentially go that way, or it might annoy them a little bit. But yeah.
Okay, interesting. We've got another one, which is it'd be really interesting to hear, actually. So you mentioned about in a case where fuel poverty was highlighted from the sensors, what particularly raised that concern when analysing the data from the sensors?
So there's two things. We've got an excess cold insight and also a more advanced fuel poverty insight. So in that specific case, we actually had an electricity sensor there as well, and a temperature humidity sensor. And what that did was actually spot, there's usually a Goldilocks zone. Public Health England recommend between 18 and I want to say 25 degrees, so that's the Goldilocks zone. And what we managed to do is, basically take out sort of the external weather data. Our data science do some other clever stuff and actually spot certain trends, which would highlight someone in fuel poverty.
Okay,
And then that's then validated by, so that's, again, it's a decision-making aid. So the housing officer or housing manager then might, or person in the sheltered, managing the sheltered scheme, might then just, look at that and think, okay, I'll have a conversation with Mr. Smith the next time I see him in a day or so. And then, or it might be a known issue as well. If it's a known issue, is it continuing? Why is that? What we found is, there has been some unfortunate cases of people not speaking up. They've been quite proud, usually elderly people not wanting to bother people. And they just sort of go under the radar. And that's, I think it's something like 10,000 excess winter deaths a year because people can't afford to heat their homes, which in like a developed country is just shocking. And energy efficiency is part of that, and like the price of energy. But another part is actually, because it might be that they might not know how to work their heating, and they might not ask people how to, some of these sort of, World War II type, born in World War II types, just very resilient, aren't they? And they don't really like sort of complaining much. My dad's very, very much like that, and it is about just getting that information so that if they are vulnerable, you can intervene earlier.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, actually. I know you mentioned about the sensors being connected from a cellular SIM network, but are the sensors sort of initially connected by a Wi-Fi signal and then sent out via the central hub via cellular network to the system, or how does that all work?
Yeah, so I mentioned LoRaWAN, and that's, I think, 868 megahertz. So ACO have their own proprietary protocol, RF, which is based on 868. So internally, it's not Wi-Fi, but it is, because Wi-Fi is not really appropriate for the meshing together of those fire alarms. So if one alarm goes off, you want all of them going off in that house. So we basically use that proprietary RF protocol, which connects to that gateway, which then goes cellular. The reason we use cellular, and landlords, how we're approaching this is that they buy the gateway and they get 10 years and then they replace it. Basically, that's their sort of ties into their capital replacement, but they don't have to pay any like data costs on that. They've got the gateway, they've got access basically, and then we found that ties in better with how they purchase things.
Yeah. And how have you found the uptake? Is it generally people who have a large stock of housing? Is it said generally, maybe, for example, local authorities and housing associations that are generally interested in this? Is it serial landlords? I presume it might be very difficult to get this across to maybe the consumer market, where people may have a few rental properties or even their own homes where they just want to sort of understand how things are going. It'd be interesting to hear your answer on that.
That's really interesting. So we targeted sort of some of the largest social landlords, so housing associations and councils initially. But funny enough, we do get like random like emails through to our sort of generic email address from all sorts. It could be hotels. In fact, we've got some interest from hotels, Airbnbs, for example. ACO are particularly looking to go into B2C this year. I think they're going into B&Q. Just for the consumer market, but I think some good adjacent markets might be the private rented sector. So, and particularly maybe like managing agents. So if they've got a few thousands, they could potentially offer that as a service to. So I rent a property out in Cardiff, and this is sort of what generated the idea in the first place, because I was working on smart home technology and smart cities in Bristol City Council. Then started renting my place out in Cardiff, and there was nothing about. And if my agent had some sort of service, I'd be sort of happy to pay X amount a month to just make sure everything was going okay, and like it wasn't, because it was our family home, so I didn't really want it getting like decayed and damp and mold everywhere. So yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of potential there.
Quite an interesting sort of alternative question is that what stops the landlord using this information sort of constructively to evict vulnerable tenants, etc. So on? That must be something that's come up quite often in the past.
Highly, acutely aware of that. Basically, I started this company to make an impact on society and the environment. So contribute towards that. Obviously, it's got to make a profit. It's got to be wash its face. But I really wanted to make that sort of lasting impact. And what I didn't want to be known for is sort of creating sort of spy technology and Skynet and all of that sort of stuff. So we've actually worked with the University of Bristol on an ethical framework, and we've got landlords involved in that ethical framework. We're quite lucky in the social housing sector because most of them are social landlords. They have that social focus, so they're not meant to really evict vulnerable people, and so at the moment it's more best practice in terms of ethics and AI and IoT and social housing. But I can see that slowly going towards recommended and then sort of regulation basically. And a key thing is, for example, we've got CO2 data, and you can tell a lot about people and their lifestyles with CO2 data, but we just use it for void risk. So most landlords in their tenancies, if you're away from your home for 3 weeks, you should tell your landlord, because there might be maintenance issues, etc. So that's in the contract, and it would only trigger at that 3 weeks, for example. And I think the key thing is, what is it being used for, and making sure that they stick with that, and that the right level of people have the right level of access. So, for example, you wouldn't necessarily want an operative having access to the entire stock view, for example.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. And then again, quite a normal question that you have generally is, for example, basic cost of setting this up and installing this within a sort of typical size property, a gateway, X amount of sensors, and then if there's any ongoing upkeep costs, and then also as well for this, is there anything that's required for subscription? So, for example, access to the portal and so on.
So we're just actually in a transition period because we're launching a new product late summer, the joint product. ACO's current gateway, I think RRP is 165. I think landlords, with negotiating bulk, might get it for like 110, something like that. Don't quote me on that. Around about that. And that's come with 10 years access to the dashboard. And usually people have these, because they're 95% of the homes, they've usually got ACO fire alarms. And again, I don't know exact prices of those, but I'm guessing they're sort of 30-40 pounds an alarm. They do require an RF module in them as well, which is sold separately, but they're not a huge amount. And then the environmental sensors, I think, are probably going to be similar in cost to the alarms, but we currently need to account for sort of the insights. So it might be that we just charge more for the environmental sensors, or we charge a subscription. So we haven't actually determined that one yet, but that will be launched again, like I said, late summer. That is coming out. So sort of watch this space.
Interesting. So in essence, the answer is that, that obviously there's some bits to clarify. However, sort of the figures that you've highlighted relatively make it understandable that it's open and not a restrictive figure. So, for example, it's not in the tens of thousands or sort of the high thousands.
No.
Like
I would say
it's relatively cost effective to install.
Yeah, you might be looking at £300 to £500 maybe over 10 years.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. I think we'll have one more question, and then we'll bring it to a close. Just generally, I found it really interesting. We were speaking just before we started, that where this has gone. Do you see that any other in regard to this? Do you feel like there's any other sensors that you would add into this sort of realm? And then I'll follow it on with a few other sort of mini questions, but that's probably one that's sort of biggest in my mind.
Yeah, so to give you a bit of context, HomeLINK prior to ACO, we had done a proof of concept and pilots and development around a number of different sensors. So we'd integrated valent boilers, we had integrated electricity sensors, door sensors, water leak sensors, different types of water leak sensors, so the contact type, and then also on pipe, environmental sensors and smoke alarms. So that was quite sort of a broad range of sensors, and there's lots more coming out, sort of Legionella, those sorts of things. With ACO, their reputation is around quality, service, and innovation. The emphasis on the quality. They don't batch test their fire alarms, for example. They're known, and this is the reason why they've got 95% of the social housing market and sell nearly 5 million units a year. And they're doubling in growth every 5 years, is because they've got that quality. So they won't just launch a sensor which has not been tested. Yeah. So in terms of other sensors coming on board, we've heard stuff like basically around energy, so boilers and air source heat pumps. We've heard water leak sensors, fire door sensors, for example. So sort of sky's the limit really. But I think the key thing is it'd be led by the market. What demand is out from the market is there. I think Poplar Harker is a good example where we did a development project with them. They're interested in very much sort of condensation, damp and mold and air quality, but they're also interested because they've got a lot of tower blocks and with water tanks in them. They just wanted like a cheap water leak sensor near there in case it overflows, because if it overflows from the top, you're a bit screwed. It's going to take out quite a few flats. So that's a very high ROI on that. So I think that something like door sensors, water leak sensors are quite easy potentially to manufacture. People in the factory sort of like kicking me now probably, but and actually provide a fair bit of value. So I wouldn't be surprised if those are starting to come online in the next few years as well.
Okay, and then I think the other thing as well, which I'd find interesting as well, obviously this is a small segment of the IoT sphere within a property. Have you found sort of synergies with other companies that have started up in the IoT area, or maybe that's led to you thinking about other sort of tangential moves to sort of bolster the understanding of a building and just generally sort of become more of a how would you say, a full spectrum sort of offer?
Not into, so in terms of IoT, I think, like I said before, we've partnered with a lot of companies. ACO tend to make things themselves because they want to ensure the quality and the supply chain. It's sort of like the Apple approach; they want the quality out there. I think there's other areas such as BIM, digital twins, etc., which could potentially tie in quite nicely. So there are other adjacent technologies which I think, and companies developing those technologies, which could potentially be looped in, or some sort of a holistic offer there in future. But I think that's probably a few years away yet. What I found is a lot of IoT companies at the moment are utilizing LoRaWAN and NB-IoT, so different connectivity solutions, but they're just not. So, for example, we deployed in one landlord which had a load of quite very good coverage, in fact, and on paper it was like 99.5% of their homes covered by LoRaWAN, and we found that 10% of the homes, 10% of the homes when we actually deployed, we had to deploy another gateway because they weren't connecting, and then another 10% just getting very sporadic data from. So again, these sort of communication technologies, they're just not widespread yet, and they've got a lot of promise, but ACO need to develop a mass market where a landlord can just pick some devices off the shelf, install it, and it works. And at the moment, that's cellular.
Interesting. Okay, all right. Well, I'll stop there. What I'll do is I'll quickly just reshare the next schedule of events just for everyone's benefit, and then we'll bring the event to a close. Apologies for those that I haven't been able to ask questions for, but obviously you can contact HomeLINK direct if you want to discuss anything further. So thank you from Luke Loveridge from HomeLINK, CEO and co-founder of the company. Really interesting and really interesting to see how the business has developed from a fledgling business, researching all sorts of areas, and now partnering up with ACO and to provide mass market products. As mentioned earlier, we've got a couple of events coming up, which is Extra Therm on the Wednesday the 30th of June and then New Lock on Wednesday the 7th of July. So please do sign up to those using the Eventbrite link. Thank you for everyone that attended today. Thank you again to Luke, and I look forward to seeing you all soon as possible. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.